On this channel, you'll see it all, including the most bizarre things the world has ever witnessed. We are a journal of anomalies, and everything you see here is based on true events. Enjoy, and be careful with what's beside you. The day my father was admitted to São Luís Gonzaga Hospital in the northern zone of Sao Paulo felt like a blur. His health had been deteriorating for weeks, and the decision to hospitalize him came as a last resort. I remember the frantic rush to the emergency room, the worried expressions on the faces of my family members, and the sterile smell that greeted us as we entered the hospital. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh, cold glow over everything, intensifying the sense of urgency and dread. We visited him regularly, making the journey to the hospital almost every day. Each visit was a mix of hope and anxiety, as we wished for his recovery while fearing the worst. The hospital itself was a sprawling complex, with long, winding corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. There was something about the place that always made me feel uneasy, a heaviness in the air that I couldn't quite explain. Near the entrance, just off to the right, stood a small chapel. It was a modest structure, with wooden pews and a simple altar adorned with a cross and a few candles. Despite its simplicity, or perhaps because of it, the chapel exuded a sense of tranquility. It was a stark contrast to the rest of the hospital, offering a brief respite from the clinical environment. Every time we passed it, I felt a strange mix of comfort and unease. The first time I noticed the shadowy figure was during one of these visits. We had just entered through the main gate, and as we made our way towards the hospital building, something caught my eye. There, perched on top of the wall, was a dark, indistinct shape. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light or perhaps a bird. But as we walked, the figure seemed to move along with us, maintaining its position just above our heads. A chill ran down my spine, and I quickened my pace, eager to reach the safety of the hospital's interior. The figure continued to follow, its presence becoming more pronounced with each step. By the time we passed the chapel, my heart was pounding in my chest. I glanced back at the wall, and for a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I saw a pair of eyes staring back at me. Trying to shake off the fear, I whispered under my breath, "Stay here, I can't help you. Stay here and help will come." As soon as the words left my lips, the figure vanished. I blinked, unsure if I had imagined the whole thing. But the unease lingered, a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't ignore. Despite my attempts to rationalize the experience, the hospital visits took on a new layer of dread. Each time we approached the entrance, I found myself scanning the wall for any sign of the shadowy figure, my heart racing with anticipation and fear. The first time I saw it, I almost dismissed it as a figment of my imagination. It was a gloomy afternoon, and the sky was overcast, casting a gray pallor over everything. We had just entered the main gate of São Luís Gonzaga Hospital, the familiar path to my father's ward stretching out before us. As we walked, I felt an inexplicable chill, a sudden drop in temperature that made me shiver despite the mild weather. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something unusual. On top of the wall that lined the entrance pathway, there was a shadowy figure. At first, I thought it might be a large bird or perhaps a stray cat. But as I focused on it, I realized it was neither. The shape was humanoid, dark and indistinct, almost like a silhouette cut out of the air itself. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, but the figure moved as we moved, gliding effortlessly along the wall. My heart began to race, a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I quickened my pace, hoping that the faster I walked, the sooner I would be inside the hospital and away from whatever it was that seemed to be watching us. But the figure kept pace, always just above us, always in my peripheral vision. I glanced at my family, but no one else seemed to notice. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more unnerving than the last. Was it a ghost? A spirit from the chapel? Or something darker, something beyond my comprehension? As we passed the small chapel near the entrance, the figure seemed to grow more distinct. I could almost make out the contours of a face, the impression of eyes staring down at me. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a surge of panic. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to break the tension that was tightening around me like a vice. In a hushed, trembling voice, I whispered, "Stay here, I can't help you. Stay here and help will come." The moment the words left my lips, the figure disappeared. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, as if it had never existed. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The wall was empty, the shadowy presence vanished. Despite its disappearance, the unease lingered. I could feel the eyes still watching me, the cold grip of fear refusing to release its hold. Every subsequent visit to the hospital was fraught with tension, my eyes constantly darting to the walls, half expecting the figure to return. The shadow had left its mark on me, a lingering sense of dread that I couldn't shake. The next time I saw the figure, it was late afternoon, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. We were making our usual visit to see my father, and as we approached the gate of São Luís Gonzaga Hospital, the uneasy feeling returned. My eyes were drawn, almost against my will, to the top of the wall. And there it was, the shadowy figure, gliding alongside us, its presence undeniable and unsettling. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum in my ears. I could feel the cold grip of fear tightening around my throat, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The figure moved with us, its dark form a stark contrast against the pale sky. It seemed closer this time, more defined, its features still obscured but its intent unmistakable. As we neared the chapel, I knew I had to do something. The small, quaint building stood silently, its stone walls offering no comfort. I could feel the weight of the figure's gaze bearing down on me, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to seep into my very bones. My family walked ahead, oblivious to the terror that shadowed our steps. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I slowed my pace and turned to face the chapel. The figure stopped, hovering just above the wall, its dark form watching me intently. My mouth was dry, my hands trembling, but I knew I had to speak. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and in a voice barely above a whisper, I said, "Stay here, I can't help you. Stay here and help will come." For a moment, everything was still. The air seemed to thicken, the world holding its breath. Then, as if my words had triggered some unseen force, the figure began to dissolve. Its edges blurred, the darkness dissipating like smoke in the wind. Within seconds, it was gone, leaving nothing but the cold air and the silence of the chapel. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. Relief washed over me, mingling with the residual fear that clung to my thoughts. The oppressive presence was gone, but the memory of it remained, a dark shadow that refused to fade. I hurried to catch up with my family, my legs weak and unsteady. They continued walking, unaware of the confrontation that had just taken place. I felt a strange mix of triumph and dread, knowing that while the figure had vanished, its memory would haunt me for days to come. As we entered the hospital, the usual noises and bustling activities seemed distant, my mind preoccupied with the eerie encounter. The words I had spoken echoed in my head, a mantra that I hoped would keep the shadow at bay. But deep down, I knew that the experience had left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the unseen forces that lurked just beyond our perception. After that initial confrontation by the chapel, I dared to hope that the shadowy figure would leave me alone. But it wasn't long before my hopes were shattered. A week later, as we made our way to the hospital, I felt that same, chilling sensation of being watched. My heart sank as I turned my head toward the wall, and there it was again. The shadowy figure, darker and more distinct than ever, seemed to glide along the wall, matching our pace. This time, its presence felt even more oppressive, as if it had grown stronger, fed by my fear. My pulse quickened, each step toward the hospital entrance becoming more difficult. I tried to focus on my father, on being there for him, but the shadow's relentless pursuit was all I could think about. It hovered just out of reach, a constant reminder of the unknown and the unseen. Every time I glanced toward the wall, it was there, watching, waiting. During subsequent visits, the figure appeared without fail. I began to dread our trips to the hospital, the thought of that silent, shadowy watcher gnawing at my nerves. I felt trapped in a nightmare, unable to escape the ever-present darkness that followed me. Each time I passed the chapel, I whispered the same words, "Stay here, I can't help you." Stay here and help will come. And each time, the figure would vanish, only to reappear the next time we visited. The encounters began to take a toll on me. My sleep was plagued by restless nights and vivid dreams of the shadowy figure. I saw it in my mind's eye, looming over me, its dark form a constant, suffocating presence. I became jumpy and anxious, my mind preoccupied with the fear of seeing the figure again. I couldn't focus on my schoolwork, my friends noticed my distraction, and even my family began to worry about my well-being. One evening, as we approached the hospital, I felt the familiar chill run down my spine. I glanced at the wall, and there it was, waiting for me. The figure seemed closer this time, its form more solid, more menacing. I could almost make out the contours of a face, the suggestion of eyes staring into mine. My breath caught in my throat, and I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the mounting fear that threatened to overwhelm me. My mother noticed my distress and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I forced a smile, nodding, but the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. "I'm fine," I lied, hoping she wouldn't press further. As we passed the chapel, I whispered my usual plea, but this time, the figure lingered longer before vanishing. It was as if it was growing resistant to my words, determined to make its presence known. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I struggled to keep my composure. The recurring sightings weighed heavily on my mind, a dark cloud that overshadowed everything else. I felt a deep sense of frustration, unable to understand why this was happening to me, or what the figure wanted. The fear and confusion were becoming unbearable, and I didn't know how much more I could take. The final straw came one night when the figure appeared not just at the hospital, but outside my bedroom window. I woke up to the sound of tapping on the glass, my heart racing as I pulled back the curtain. There, standing in the moonlight, was the shadowy figure, its dark form pressed against the window, staring in at me. I screamed, the sound piercing the silent night, and the figure vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The next morning, I begged my parents to let me stay home, too terrified to go anywhere near the hospital. They reluctantly agreed, sensing the depth of my fear, but I knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The shadowy figure had become a part of my life, an inescapable presence that haunted my every step. And I didn't know how to make it stop. The constant terror and the relentless appearances of the shadowy figure drove me to a breaking point. Desperate for answers and some semblance of peace, I began to explore spiritual practices that promised understanding and protection. I turned to Spiritism, hoping to find explanations for the inexplicable occurrences that had been plaguing me. The more I read about Spiritism, the more it resonated with my experiences. The idea that spirits of the dead could linger, trying to communicate with the living, seemed to align perfectly with what I'd been seeing. The accounts of others who had encountered similar apparitions offered me a strange comfort. I wasn't alone in this. I decided to delve deeper into the teachings, attending meetings and reading everything I could find on the subject. During one of the Spiritism sessions, I met a kind, elderly woman named Dona Maria. She was a devout practitioner of Umbanda, a syncretic Brazilian religion that blends African traditions with Catholicism and Spiritism. Dona Maria invited me to attend a ceremony, sensing my distress and offering me a chance at relief. Umbanda ceremonies were unlike anything I had ever experienced. The vibrant rituals, the rhythmic drumming, and the chanting filled me with a sense of awe and reverence. The practitioners seemed to move with a purpose, their eyes closed in deep concentration as they communicated with the spirits. It was both unsettling and strangely comforting to witness their devotion. At first, I was apprehensive, unsure if this was the right path for me. But as I participated in more ceremonies, I began to feel a shift within myself. The priests and mediums of Umbanda spoke of protection and guidance, of ancestors watching over us and offering their aid. They performed cleansing rituals to rid me of any negative energies and taught me prayers to strengthen my spirit. One night, after a particularly powerful ceremony, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. For the first time in months, I slept without fear, undisturbed by nightmares or shadowy figures. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders, and I could finally breathe again. Over time, the sightings of the shadowy figure became less frequent, and the oppressive feeling that had haunted me gradually dissipated. My newfound spiritual practices brought me a sense of peace and protection. I continued to study Spiritism and actively participated in Umbanda ceremonies, growing more confident in my ability to ward off any malevolent spirits that might come my way. Reflecting on my journey, I realized that these practices had not only stopped the frightening encounters but had also brought me a deeper understanding of the spiritual world. I no longer felt like a helpless victim, but rather someone with the knowledge and tools to protect myself. The shadowy figure had lost its power over me, and I had gained a sense of control over my own destiny. In the end, my journey through the realms of Spiritism and Umbanda had transformed me. What began as a desperate search for answers had evolved into a path of spiritual growth and enlightenment. I had faced my fears head-on and emerged stronger, armed with the wisdom of ancient traditions and the support of a community that understood my struggles. As I looked back on those harrowing months, I felt a profound gratitude for the experiences that had led me to this point. The shadowy figure that once terrified me had become a catalyst for my spiritual awakening, guiding me toward a deeper connection with the unseen world and a newfound sense of peace.